So I'm here with Dr. Madden, a librarian at Duke University, and she'll be talking a little bit about the role of technology, more specifically search engines, especially Google, on her role in the library, the environment of the library in general. So, Dr. Madden, with the advent of Google and other similar information technology, how has your role, or the librarian's role in general, changed?
So when you think about the history of libraries, especially during the last 30 years, there have been a lot of changes. In the past, we've always defined ourselves by what collections we had. And so in the past, when we said we are a certain kind of library, we would then say we have so many millions of books and so many millions of pieces of information. And that has changed with the electronic environment, electronic materials environment, where access to materials is just as important as having or owning something. In addition to that, services are becoming more important, so we now have people who support working with data, working with digital humanities like text mining, working with geographic information systems, and working with technology in the classroom. So those services have been added in recent years. The other big change has been that libraries are investing in discovery system. The old discovery system was a card catalog. Physically, you would walk to it and look A, B, C, D. Now we have discovery systems, not only databases, but a layer on top of databases, not only a catalog, but collaborative catalogs. And then in addition to that, a very important role for the library that's changing because of technology is preservation. So when you think about you yourself putting something on a Word site, are you thinking about where that's going to be in 10 years, or are you more focused on this semester?
This semester, I'd say. Yeah.
So the library would think about, man, this kid did something amazing, we want to preserve this. So libraries think about preservation, and it plays out in a bigger arena when you think about national libraries that try to archive tweets, for example, or that try to archive PDFs that people put up. There are crowdsourcing projects where people contribute intellectually, and the funding may not be there 10 years from now. There are places where people will transcribe manuscripts. You know, you sign up, you get the image of a manuscript, and you translate it into a typed English, you know, things like that. All of these projects, if there is a lot of investment of time and effort, should be preserved. And that's a big area for libraries, especially when it's not print. Print is easy. You put it in a good box, you make sure the paper is right, you know, and you put it on a shelf or you put it in a storage unit, climate controlled, and you're done. But when you have writers or even Duke faculty doing all their work on computer, and 20 years later they are leaving or they're retiring, or they want someone to look at the versions of their work, you know, then suddenly you're getting a hard drive. You know, what do you do with that? What does preservation mean when you're not getting pieces of paper?
Okay. Also, a very important thing to cover when talking about technology and the effect it's had on, you know, the library culture is the fact that there's so much information out there and it's so easily accessible to us. So sometimes we feel we can just, if we need to find an answer, we just go on the internet or the computer that we own and find the information. So I feel like your role is definitely changing because of that, in terms of how often you're utilized, in terms of how often people come to libraries and ask you for help, because they, you know, especially our generation, feels so comfortable with technology. So do you feel like that's the case, that you're being somewhat underutilized?
No, actually, all studies show that once something is out on the internet, usage goes up. And when usage goes up, questions arise. Something that always surprises students is when I say, if you use Google Scholar on campus, you're using the library, because we allow services to crawl our websites, right? We have the publishers and the library make it obvious to you what we are already paying for. So actually the library is not just a building, it's services that go beyond the building, and you actually enjoy those just by going on Google. When you use Google Books, you are using a collaboration of libraries, 6 original libraries that opened their stacks for Google to come and digitize those things. So again, you're using Google Books, you're using libraries in a way. Google Books is the popular product. Libraries have decided that they need to think about preservation of these things, so they have formed Hearty Trust, which is a long-term effort to keep those books available to you. So that is again that topic of, it's not just a building, it's not just the collections, it's services and sort of long-term thinking.
So although you say that when people are using search engines such as Google Scholar or other research methods, that's somewhat the same as using the library. So you're saying that you're not underutilized, but from a more personal perspective, as you know, your role and how often you have to go out of your way to help someone. How do you view technology and the way it's affected you personally, and you know how often people come to you and ask for help?
Yeah, students come with more complicated questions, and I think it's interesting when Google and internet search engines are good at finding information. If you have a particular information need, you plug it in. It's a matching search right now. It's not yet really semantic, right? That kind of thing is easy to be had on the internet. But when it comes to knowledge creation and a sort of a deeper understanding, this is when the library and the library's discovery systems become more important, because while it's really wonderful, I mean, everybody starts with Google, or actually if you know several languages, you know that there are other products than Google. Google is just one of many search engines. You start there, that's great, but I find that anytime you have to do a topic where it's important to understand the historiography of the topic, to understand the chronology of the debate, to understand the agents, to understand the biases, to understand who produces what and when, you will need to use our systems which utilize bibliographic control. We call it bibliographic control. It's understanding and harnessing all the data points about an object. So I told you, it so happens I got a collection from of things printed in East Germany, and I think this will nicely show you the difference between a Google search and going into the library, even with a print and electronic mix. In a Google search, the results are kind of flat, and the expertise that you want to develop about a topic in order to talk about it in a reasonable way is harder to get when everything's flat. So if you look at this table, you will immediately see what I mean in this collection. So these are things printed in East Germany. You have a pile here that is, once you start leafing through it, is basically propaganda. You have documentary materials in terms of photograph. You have here, you have a typescript that has never been published. You have government documents and legal materials. You have things published in Moscow in English for the West. You have school books. You have area studies of communist countries where Western researchers didn't have access. So you may have data there that weren't available in the West. You have disciplinary discourse, humanities in East Germany, political science in East Germany. You wouldn't exactly, you would understand when you look at the book and where it was printed and where the information was produced, you would understand that's a different point of view from a Western point of view. And in this case also we have a very good collection of foreign relations between East Germany and Africa in this case. So how would you, if you did a Google search on East Germany, how would this become obvious to you? right? We're looking at 50, 60 years of materials and their various origins, their various purposes, their various intentions. Now, a catalog, a WorldCat type catalog would already help you with descriptions. It would include things like propaganda or juvenile literature or popular literature or legal materials and things like that. So you can see that, yes, you will find traces of many things in an internet search, but then the real work begins.
Okay, and it's interesting. So we see all these books out here, and obviously prior generations, this is what they used. They went to the library and they found, you know, hard copies and textual information as opposed to the information technology that we use today. So how would you compare our generation's ability to conduct research as opposed to that of prior generations?
I would say the key thing, the important thing about reading is reading. The important thing about research is that it matters to you, that you have a sense of ownership, that you have a sense that maybe you can make a difference in how something is viewed or in an action that could be taken. And I think those things haven't changed. But as you can see here, somebody who came into the library 30 years ago to do research on a particular topic would have found materials co-located. You could have walked in and you could have said, oh, here are all the newspapers from abroad, or here are all the books on German literature, or here are all the books on American history. It would all be on one shelf, and people always say, oh, you can browse, you find things you didn't know that existed. That beginning research step was easier back then than it is now for you guys. Mm-hmm. Which is why you have more library instruction. We sort of try to show you how complex and historically deep and diverse and multimedia and multilingual things are. Yeah. And 100,000 Google results sort of don't do it.
Exactly, and kind of expanding upon that, definitely technology and search engines have definitely, I think, complicated the research process just by providing so much information to us, and since there's such a high quantity of information, maybe sometimes it's harder to locate, you know, the best quality of information. So more specifically, focusing on Google, when we type something into the search bar and a bunch of results show up, you know, oftentimes we scroll through the first few sources, and if we're not satisfied by those, we go back to the search bar and alter a word or two, hoping that a new list of sources will show up. So do you think that when you do this search process on Google, that the first page of sources is, you know, necessarily the most accurate or necessarily the best?
So I wouldn't say best or worst. I would say, first of all, one tool is never enough. You know, in America you have 150 cereals in the cereal aisle. Why would you use one tool to search for papers? Google is just one tool. Google is based on relevancy ranking and on the language that you use. So it's kind of it's hard to go beyond what you already know. To see a different point of view, but it is a good starting point. So when you start with Google and you see one good thing, you can take it to the Duke catalog, for example, if it's a book, and then you can use what we call subject classification, which means that we connect books that have similar or related topics, and that helps you see things that you may not have thought about. Things that aren't implied in the language you use to search on Google. And so I would say, again, you just need to know how to use the tools. And that is something that you have to learn more so than the generation before you.
Exactly, and that's what I was thinking. Like, if I do a search on Google, I don't know how confident I feel in using these other databases to find more sources and expand upon what I find on Google. And I think that's mostly true for our generation, but yeah, definitely technology has complicated the research process in that regard.
But you're also more powerful. You can do so much more. You know, in my day, you know, if you had to pull things off the shelf to make a copy, to bring it home, I mean, you can do so. You can survey so much more and zero in so much quicker on what you actually want to do, what interests you. You know.
Yeah, so that's definitely an advantage of search engines and the technology that we can use during the research process. So kind of to expand upon that, what do you think are the main positives and negatives of search engines such as Google on the research process?
Um, Again, for example, people say, "Oh, now that we have the internet, people don't know they read so fast, this and that." I think again, the important thing about reading is reading. The device is not so important. So it's not, is Google bad or not bad? It's, are you willing to sit down and read? You know, in terms of what I'm afraid of, I don't like the monopoly. I don't like one place for everything. I think for information should be diverse and distributed, and there should be sort of a marketplace and a democracy about it. I kind of worry about that. But like I said before, Google is a great starting point. It's one tool. It's one of many tools. It does what it does well, you know. So it's not better or worse. It's just know what it is, you know, and use some other things.
Okay. Just to conclude, one final question for you. In what ways can librarians assist today's students during the research process?
So at Duke, a lot is expected of Duke students. I actually, where I help students the most is when it is a historically deep project, like if you were to do something on East Germany, to understand the chronology and the historiography and the context, the producers of the information and all those kinds of things. But I find Duke students actually write proposals for research, and they need help there because you need to very quickly say, what's the body of literature on this? You need to very quickly assess a lot of stuff so that you can say, here is something that I can contribute, right? So I help students go to archives, you know, identify archives, because you can find so many things on Google. You ask yourself, well, what's the one thing that nobody has thought of, that nobody has looked at? So then you get to the archive level, and then, or you get to a community level of things that aren't preserved by anyone or haven't been taken into a library, like guest work or communities in Germany that have papers, you know, for example, or things like that. So I find that the questions I get, apart from the 20-page research paper, which is always a big thing, where a faculty will give a student a direction, and they need to somehow figure out how to find the types of things that the professor wants them to consider. You know, there I can help. So apart from that, the more difficult questions are really doing some original research. I had a student do that kind of research and find a French journal held in 2 libraries in the world. So how do you get a hold of that if you can't travel? So that's the kind of thing where I help.